Shalom. So, on Friday during the question and answer period with Paul Vanderklay on Bridges of Meaning, we had a little discussion about why you should or should not look at the original languages of the Bible. So for me, that means mostly the Hebrew. But just generally, somebody asked Paul Vanderklay, do you need to look at the original languages in order to not fall into doctrinal error, right? Major doctrinal error. And I think that has a little bit to do with basically my message. And so hi Adam. So I decided that I spoke during the Q&A, but I thought I really should explain things in depth, really give you a good grounding in the reasons why I think you should try to understand the original Hebrew. Now, there's a lot of issues with that. Obviously, the first thing everybody brings up is, yeah, you're not going to be able to really understand the language the same way that somebody who was fluent 2,000-3,000 years ago was. And what makes you think you're better than the experts? What makes you think you understand better than the experts? One very good complaint some people have is, well, what are you saying? Are you saying that people who don't know Hebrew have no access to the Bible whatsoever? I'm not saying any of that stuff. I'm not saying that necessarily you're going to become a better expert on the languages than the experts are. I'm not trying to say that you're going to have a perfect understanding using all the tools that we have right now. And I'm not saying that people who don't have these tools or don't have the capacity to engage with the Hebrew themselves can't understand the Bible at all. What I am saying is, we know that there are many different ways of looking at the Bible. When you choose a translation, and especially when you choose a translator, you are getting some human being's way of looking at it. And what has been miraculously opened up to us in our generation, and I believe it is a miracle, right, is an opportunity for us to engage with the Bible in ways we were never able to before. I mean, really, when you look at the first people who translated the Bible, they were put to death. Most famously, the first guy, I want to say his name was Tinsdale. He was put to death. And I think there is a reason why Christians don't teach their children Hebrew, why they don't directly engage with the Bible. And look, you're going to get warnings that engaging with the Bible directly will turn you into a heretic. You will see people actually saying that. And there's a reason for that, because it can turn you into what a majority of Christians would call a heretic. And so I want to walk you through some of the things so that you can really understand, okay, this is the argument, right? I mean, for anything important, you realize that it's really important to not only choose your experts, but to listen to those experts and see who's making the most sense, right? And you can validate the types of things that I'm going to tell you, right? So basically everything I'm going to say today, I've gone through at various stages, including my video, Is It Christian to Lie? In my video regarding the Son of Man debate. But to understand the actual debates that are going on, the reasons people are choosing various translations, and to give yourself an opportunity to directly experience the Bible, I think you should try to use, and all of the tools that I point out, they're all available for free, right? So I think it's pretty clear that it is to your benefit not to just go with who the experts are, because what's most clear to me is that these experts are chosen not because people are trying to find the best experts, but because those experts have the opinions that people agree with. For example, Bill Schlegel, who is an expert on biblical geography and was involved in many translation projects, is no longer being used as an expert by major translation projects, and he's considered a heretic because now he's a Unitarian. Well, doesn't that tell you something? They certainly do not have people who have read the Bible, been convinced to convert to Judaism as experts in their translation committees, right? So I think it's important that you seriously address the Bible as it is, right? And towards the end, I am going to talk about the validity of the Masoretic text and the Septuagint and everything. But at the beginning, let's just suppose, and if anybody has any questions during this whole time, please do ask in the chat, because really what my channel, I would like to think, offers is that I'm here available to you, right? I'm not exactly the most knowledgeable person in the world, but I am available. And like and subscribe, please. And share the channel with anybody you think would be interested. So let's start looking at some of the ways in which Christian Bible translators lie to you, and I really do think they are lying to you. One of the ones which gets me most is these titles. These are just completely human created titles. They have, the translators have decided to put their own words in bold at the beginning of parts of the Bible in order to color how you view it. Jewish translation will not have titles, because the first question will be, where'd you get these titles from, and who gave you permission to write in people's Bibles? That one, it just gets to me. Second one is the capitalizations. Obviously, in Hebrew, there is no capitalization. And while the capitalizations have actually been getting better among Christian Bibles in being more consistent, because if you look at the original King James Version, basically the capitals were only used when they were trying to make you think of Jesus. Right? They didn't use them correctly whenever it was referring to God. It was hey, look, this is Jesus in your Bible type thing, right? And it was really bad. So the New King James Version has been trying to do it more consistently. The NIV uses fewer. That would be Satan's children who learned from him, they added, taken away and twisted the scriptures to fit their Trinitarian doctrine of a triune God. I don't know what to tell you in New Eyes, I guess. I wouldn't say Satan's children. I would say people who have been deceived. And I think we live in a time where God is, in fact, showing us a lot of things that a lot of people did not have access to. The Dead Sea Scrolls being primary among them. But you'll notice, for example, Spirit of God is capitalized. Well, where'd they get that idea of capitalizing the Spirit of God? It's obviously a Trinitarian interpretation. Satan is known as the greatest liar ever and deceiver. Okay, I'm not that big on aggrandizing one Satan over another. But okay. Just checking something. You'll notice in a Hebrew Bible, it's Spirit of God. It's not capitalized. There are a lot of things like this. And when you're looking at the Bible in the original, you can clearly see that it's not there. Now, if they're doing this with just capitalizations and things like that, just imagine that they the word selection bias there. Jesus also said you should listen to everything that the Pharisees tell you to do. So yeah, you're picking and choosing, New Eyes. But let's go into things that are more obvious in their particularity. So this is Daniel 7:13, right? And it says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man," right? And this has become a big, huge thing in Christianity. And please see my video on the Son of Man debate for a lot more detail about this. But there's a reason why this is the biggest debate in New Testament studies of the past 100 years, without any doubt. As far as I know, nobody says that this isn't the biggest debate, because there is a huge debate. And you'll notice this note here in the NIV. It says, the Aramaic phrase bar enosh means human being. The phrase Son of Man is retained here because of its use in the New Testament as a title of Jesus, probably based largely on this verse. Well, there's a huge argument about that, right? And when you look in the NKJV or other translations, they're not even gonna. I mean, they've even capitalized one, right? And it's in italics because I don't think the Hebrew itself has a chad there. Chaze havet bechazel lalia v'aru im anani shemaya kevar anash. Yeah, there's no chad there, right? Kevar anash. So they've capitalized the one. There isn't even a one there, right? Again, they're giving you a particular view of Scripture, and the people who have been selected for this task have in fact been selected not because they are the most expert people, but because they believe the things that they do, right? So when you look to a Christian translation, it is directly trying to change things in order for it to be more Christian. And then, I mean, honestly, I just remember when I was in college, I went to this event where this Holocaust survivor was speaking, and she said she was actually going to Sinai Temple, God forgive us, and she got a King James version of the Bible because she wanted to read her Bible, and she just figured she wouldn't read the Christian part. But once she got to the end of the Hebrew Bible, she kept on reading, and she noticed, hey, it all goes together. Guess what? It's a translation that was deliberately made in order to do that. Why would you be surprised about that? Right? It is a translation made for that specific purpose. And so if we are going to be honest, if we're trying to recover what is true in the Bible, and we realize that we as human beings are fallible, that certainly the church has not been perfect over the years, and I'm not saying anybody's been perfect. I think the track record of the rabbis is a lot better than the track record of any of the churches, that's for sure. But I'm not even making that mistake, that argument. As human beings, let's actually try to look at the text itself, understand it, and move forward from the original text, as opposed to picking the particular experts that we prefer based on the answers that they give us. This is ultimate confirmation bias. You would not do this for anything else. Why would you do this with that which is the most important, which I would say is true of the Bible, right? This is that which is most important. Okay, let's keep on going. Now, this I was really surprised about. Paul Vanderklay once mentioned that the Masoretic text is different on, this is Genesis 18? Yeah, 18, 20, 22. I'm like, it is? What are you talking about? So I looked at the note, and it's a very confusing note. That's why Paul misunderstood the note. It says Masoretic text. So this is the Masoretic text, an ancient Hebrew scribal tradition, but the Lord remained standing before Abraham. So I'm like, what are you talking about? since when do does do Christian Bibles quote ancient Hebrew scribal traditions? Where'd they get this from? And then I looked at Rashi, and so Rashi says that this verse is a tikkun sofrim, and the original was the other way around, mipnei kavodo, right? Which is a cute homily. I would never translate it as that, as saying an ancient Hebrew scribal tradition, that it was the other way around, right? That's not what we mean when we say something is a tikkun sofrim. And I think when you engage with the Hebrew text more, and you see exactly how, so a very common thing in the Hebrew Bible are very slight variations that would basically be thought of as spelling mistakes, I guess you would say. For example, when it talks about Rebecca, it's Na'ara is written without the silent hey at the end, right? Or a lot of times things Yud and Vav look very similar in the Hebrew. They're just a tiny bit different, and you could certainly argue, and I think any secular scholar would argue, that the Masoretic text is retaining spelling mistakes. Now, if you want to believe that, that's not my belief. I'm not really going to argue with you, because it doesn't make any difference. And I think arguing over small minutiae like that makes no sense. But we retain the spelling mistakes, and that's because the Masoretic tradition has we don't fix things. We don't fix anything in our Bible, right? There's a difference between what's called the Katuv and the Kri, how it's written, how it's read. And if you're engaging in the Hebrew, you will see that. You will see that quite often, actually. Pretty much, I think, many chapters, it's on a regular basis. Sometimes there are a few chapters that don't have any, but it happens enough that if you read the Bible in Hebrew, it's there. I think that actually testifies to the validity of the scribal tradition. And even at the time of Jesus, there were scribes, there were Jewish scribes, and it was very important to us that the scribes be trained as scribes to actually retain the text as best as possible. Christians didn't really develop a scribal tradition for several hundred years, maybe even 1,000 years, right? And it wasn't that important to them to keep the text as it was. Now we have the miracle of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which, I mean, please look into the archaeological validity of them. If you want to use the Dead Sea Scrolls, any of the Dead Sea Scrolls, feel free, right? You will find yourself coming back to the Masoretic tradition, as pretty much everybody has. There's nobody who really doesn't start with the Masoretic text. The King James version started with the Masoretic text. Jerome started with the Masoretic text. Pretty much, I don't even know of anyone who claims not to have started with the Masoretic text, because it's undoubtedly the best, right? And so I remember taking an anti-missionary course in yeshiva, and I remember later reading a book by a anti-missionary, answering Christian missionary arguments. And the too long didn't read, the one word explanation that they gave me at the beginning of that class that was emphasized by that book was, any argument a Christian makes, look in your Bible, look at the Hebrew, look at the verses around it, and look at how the translation is strange to you, right? It doesn't go along with normal Hebrew. And that will point out where the mistake is. And actually, this is something that the Talmud says, right? It says that anything in the Bible that the heretics can misunderstand, the answer is actually close by. So this has been a Jewish tradition for well over 1,000 years. The Talmud was written around 500. That's when it was finally redacted. So over 1,500 years we've been saying this. And while no serious Christian made this argument, this fact had actually become a reason why some Christians, and we'll talk about the guy from the Dead Sea Scrolls, had come to believe that the rabbis had in fact changed the Masoretic text, because it was like, why is it answering all of our right? Why is it controverting all of our beliefs, right? And because it is, right? But and that's why I do believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls needed to be found. And thank God they were, and it's a modern day miracle. So Adam says, this is one of the reasons I really want to learn the Hebrew language. I try to help as much as I can. I do have to say, I do not focus on teaching Hebrew. I focus on helping people who don't necessarily know Hebrew to use the various tools that are available to make it easier for them to engage with the Hebrew. If you are serious about learning biblical Hebrew, there is a channel called Aleph with Beth. Her name is Beth, and her husband's name is Andrew. Very nice people, unfortunately Trinitarians, but God have mercy on them. They have put together a beautiful channel where they immersively teach you biblical Hebrew. I highly recommend it for people who are seriously considering learning biblical Hebrew. There's also many channels which teach just modern Hebrew, and learning modern Hebrew can in fact help you learn biblical Hebrew. It does kind of go together, but my channel, I try to make it as easy for people who don't necessarily know Hebrew to try to engage the text themselves. Okay? Now let me give you a... so my point here is that when it's convenient to them, the footnotes will point out things which are, convenient to them. Do you know where to obtain a copy of the Samaritan Bible? I know that the Samaritan Bible is available online for free. A scan is difficult, partially because, some of the Samaritan Bibles were stolen. They're not exactly all the same. And part of the problem is it's written in Samaritan. So the Samaritan alphabet is much closer to Paleo-Hebrew, to the actual Hebrew script as opposed to the square script we use today. And part of the problem is it doesn't have vocalizations. That's why it's very hard to read. So there are websites which will allow you to compare things or to pull up Samaritan texts in Hebrew square script. I've done that before just to try to compare things. But the Samaritan text is so obviously corrupted, I don't think anybody seriously uses it. They don't have great scribes. It's only the 5 books of Moses, where it's different from the Masoretic text. It's kind of obvious why. Their 10 Commandments talks about har grizim, which is just ridiculous. But yeah, you can find it online. So what I was trying to tell you is their notes will pull from the rabbinic tradition when they want to, will pull from different manuscripts when they want to, right? Not necessarily, they're trying to make an argument, right? And when you open your Bible as if this isn't one argument that someone can make, then you're going to be deceived, right? The argument itself is hidden in the text that you're reading, as opposed to looking at the original text and seeing how it compares between the various interpretations, so that you yourself can decide, hey, you know what? These arguments don't make a lot of sense. And you will see that. And there's a reason why so many very religious and knowledgeable Christians convert to Judaism, and it really is an astounding number who do, as opposed to I have actually gone through lists that I've gotten from missionaries of names of supposedly knowledgeable Jews who have converted to Christianity. The closest thing was a Rabbi Lichtenstein. I believe his name was Isaac Yitzchak Lichtenstein. And he wrote a book explaining his beliefs that Christianity is true, and I read it. It wasn't a very good book. And he actually never converted himself. He was never baptized. So, and I went through the rest of the list. They gave me like several dozen names. I looked through every single one. And it's like this unicorn that Messianics will tell you exists doesn't exist. I have yet to find one credible, knowledgeable Jew who's gone, hey, Christianity's right, let me convert. Not one. And you have to ask yourself why that is. Whereas there's a very large number, you can find testimony after testimony all over on Tanakh Talk's website, YouTube channel. They have a playlist of like 60 testimonials, right? And that's just the people who came on their channel to talk to them. There's so many more. There are books written about this. What about Ratisbon? I have no idea who Ratisbon is. I would have to look it up. Never heard of him, whoever that is. There were a few years ago 4 girls from I don't know, Marie Alphonse Ratisbon. I would have to look it up. There were 4 girls from Satmar High School who did get baptized. Unfortunately, girls' high schools in Satmar don't teach Torah, and this was a huge scandal within Judaism. That's the only real example I know of it. Um, but yeah. Okay, so let's keep on going. Now, I wanted to give you a an example of a verse, which I'm not saying that they're mistranslating this. They're not mistranslating it. I can understand why they would translate it the way they do. But I think there's a reason why people who read the Bible in Hebrew understand the problem with the Trinity much more than people who don't, right? So John Calvin didn't know Hebrew. Miguel de Cervantes, who John Calvin murdered, did know Hebrew. And he was a Christian. He was a Unitarian Christian. He denied the Trinity, and that's why they killed him. And, I mean, look at all the various translations of this verse, right? The Lord will be king over the whole earth. This is Zechariah 14:9. Zechariah 14:9. On that day there will be one Lord, and his name the only name. Not a bad translation, but it doesn't have the emphasis that it does in the Hebrew. New Living Translation. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day there will be one Lord. His name alone will be worshipped. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be one, and his name one. Not capital one. I would capitalize it. On that day the Lord will become king over all the earth. The Lord alone, and his name alone. King James. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall there be one Lord, and his name one. No, not capital his. New King James. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day it shall be, the Lord is one, in quotes, and his name is one, and his name one. That's I like this one best. Let's look at the Jewish translation they have here. Where's the JPS Tanakh 1917? And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day shall the Lord be one, and his name one. When you read it in the Hebrew, it has a special flavor to it. And it's a very, I mean, we say this in prayers, at the end of every prayer. V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yihyeh Hashem echad, ushmo echad. I don't think you can really translate that emphasis, right? And I think there's a lot of emphasis like that on the unity of God, on the one nature of God. And frankly, it's the reason why Christians don't recite Deuteronomy 6:4 like Jews do, and the early Christians did, and place the heavy emphasis that they did on it, and the Bible itself places on it. There is reason for you to directly engage with the language itself. Now, are you going to get the full flavor? No. Are you going to become some great expert? No. But are you going to get a better flavor? I think very clearly. And I didn't bring up examples because I already have a lot of examples, and this is going to, I think, going to be a long video. But there are things you can do with the original Hebrew that you would never be able to do in translation. Whether you're talking about the poetic nature, Genesis 1 is one of the most poetic texts in the entirety of the Bible, which is very poetic itself, right? And when you listen to Genesis 1 as poetry in the original language, and you see its poetic nature. You see the fact that, so the way poetry in Hebrew works is through alliteration, using the same sounds over and over again. And anybody who reads Genesis 1 in Hebrew will actually notice that many of the letters in the alphabet are barely used at all. Why? Because all of the language is using similar sounds over and over and over again. It's alliterating. It's one of the most alliterative and repetitive texts out there, right? In the entire Bible. And so when you read it in Hebrew, that poetry is obvious. You're not going to ever be able to translate that. It's just not possible, right? Certainly not even closely keeping the actual meaning of the words, right? So Psalm 22. Now this one, okay, Psalm 22:16. Dogs surround me, a pack of villains encircles me. They pierce, and of course there's a note, my hands and my feet. I have a video on this on Psalm 22 where we go over it. Honestly, I don't understand why this is such a huge deal for Christians, but it is. Because the other translation, the translation I think anybody who's being serious about it would take is like lions in my hands and my feet, not they pierced. And here we'll read the note. See, that's the thing. So Dominic says Qumran text says pierced, doesn't it? See, that's the thing. Okay, let's read this note and we'll see. It says, Dead Sea Scrolls and some manuscripts of the Masoretic text, Septuagint and Syriac. Most manuscripts of the Masoretic text, me, like a lion. Okay, so, first of all, let's just be perfectly clear. The Dead Sea Scrolls, none of them have a vocalization because vocalizations didn't exist back then, right? Vocalizations were created by the Masoretes, right? And so they're saying some manuscripts of the Masoretic text have it with a different vocalization, which lets you make the argument that the Christians make. But I've never seen anybody who disagrees with what the Hebrew is here, which is Chaf, Aleph, Resh, Yud. I think there are versions that have Chaf, Aleph, Resh, Vav, Ka'aru, right? Which maybe would be a better pierced. I mean, if it was Ka'aru instead of Ka'ari, right? If there was a Vav at the end instead of a Yud, I could understand the argument. As it is, I don't even understand the arguments. Why? Because, yeah, so they're saying Dead Sea Scrolls. I guess they found Dead Sea Scrolls that say that you could argue is Ka'aru, right? So this is part of the problem. Even if you have the text in front of you, right? Arguing over whether this is a Yud or a Vav at the end, right? 99.99999% of people who are reading this text, certainly for the first time, if they read it, they, without any vocalizations, are just going to say Ka'ari. Ka'ari actually shows up in other verses in this in this psalm, right? Verse 21, right? Rescue me from the mouth of the lions, right? It's just, and so their argument, the Christian argument, is that there is a verb, chaf resh hey, which means to dig, that somehow in one place in the entirety of the Bible is ka'aru, right? Chaf vav resh, chaf aleph resh vav, and or maybe ka'ari, right? And in this one place, the only place ever, right, it means pierced. And the whole argument is completely ideological. I don't think you could talk to anybody who's a fluent reader of Hebrew who would look at a text, even in modern Hebrew, when the Vav and the Yod look so different. I mean, in biblical Hebrew, Yod and Vav, it's just so close, and Ka'ari shows up all over the Bible, right? So, look, if you talk to Christian experts, they're going to tell you, no, pierced makes perfect sense. And if you talk to Jewish experts, they're going to tell you, come on, it's obviously Ka'ari. It's obviously Ka'ari. I find the whole argument ridiculous, and I don't even know why Christians continue with it, right? I don't think it's something that somehow is, makes Christianity false, right? Right. I agree with you, Dominic. And if you read the rest of the psalm, it makes sense. It's like it talks about lions as well. So it's one of these arguments that you will make because you want to you want to shore up Christianity. And all I ask is that you look at the Hebrew yourself, look at the verse, and see if the experts are making wild arguments, and they really are, and you will see that for yourself, right? So New Eyes is apparently a preterist Protestant. Good thing that God writes his scriptures upon our hearts to know his truth. He says, no man need teach you but the Holy Spirit from God in Christ. Amen. Which is, vast majority of Christians obviously don't believe this. So, if that's what you believe, that, God speaks to you directly, you have right at it. I think most of us find that silly. Jacob, curious where the pierced reasoning comes from historically, the reading. I think the Septuagint. I think so. I'm not sure. I think the Septuagint translates it as pierced, and so the is that what the note said? Septuagint, yeah, Septuagint and Syriac. So that has been the traditional Christian interpretation for thousands of years. It's just so we'll get into the Septuagint, but I mean, there's a reason why Christian translations are in fact done from the Masoretic text. It's just so obviously better, and Christians, when they need to or want to, will resort to the Septuagint. Um, uh, yeah, so New Eyes is also apparently one of these people who believes that most people are going to hell. Certainly not what Judaism teaches and what I believe. I think I think that's a horrible view of God. I don't think most people are going to hell. I think, in fact, um, God God has plans. Almost everyone is saved, and again, I think the miraculous ability to see the truth we have today is truly miraculous. Okay, so that was a Ka'ari. Now let's look at Isaiah 7. Uh, so most Christians will say, oh, and it says the virgin shall give birth. And that Jesus fulfilled that prophecy. Christians first came up with the idea that Jesus was born of a virgin and then went back and found their prophecy. Um, so the Septuagint does apparently translate, um, where is it? Verse 14. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Notice all of the notes here. Um, and Michael Brown has a very, very long and convoluted explanation of how this works. Um, and once you go through all the various arguments, you might need to rely on his um, rather, I would say, contrived explanation. It doesn't say virgin. It obviously doesn't say virgin. It couldn't possibly have said virgin in context, because Isaiah 7, clearly in context, is talking about somebody who, during the life of Ahaz, is going to be born. Now, who that person is, how, right? But it's obviously at that time talking about a child to be born during Ahaz's reign. And the idea, the Christian idea, is that you can have a prophecy which is fulfilled at its time, and then it will echo, right? That prophecy will echo through time. My problem with this way of viewing it is, if you're telling me that it's an echo, then the initial one must have been the prototype, right? So are you going to tell me that the child born during the time of Ahaz was born of a virgin? Seriously. He was also called Emmanuel. Was he also an incarnation of Jesus, of the Trinity, the Son, the whatever? No, seriously. Um, so what Michael Brown does with this is he splits up the prophecy in several ways, and he says so, and he has this whole explanation about how part of the prophecy is at the time, and the other part is a more broad prophecy. Um, it makes no sense, especially because in Judaism, right, the great thing of a miracle is that you can tell it's a miracle. How do you know she was a virgin? How do you know that she was a virgin? How is that a prophecy which can be in any way verified, right? And it becomes a huge problem in the Christian scriptures. There must have been a star that announced it to everyone, right? Which then you have to wonder with the people who later are like, isn't that Joseph's son? Well, who are from Jesus's hometown? It makes no sense, right? And the word there is quite obviously not virgin, like this says, or young woman. It's lying to you. I'm sorry, it just is. Now, I bring Exodus 22:9 up mostly because I want to point out how the experts are chosen for their particular beliefs, right? So Michael Heiser, who is considered one of the great experts in Hebrew from that Hebrew department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is evil incarnate. For some reason, like, all the bad ideas come from University of Wisconsin-Madison Hebrew department. But Michael Heiser, he has this argument that the word Elohim is never used of human beings, right? And so let's read the parts. So starts at verse 7. If anyone gives a neighbor silver or goods for safekeeping, and they are stolen from the neighbor's house, the thief, if caught, must pay back double. But if the thief is not found, the owner of the house must appear before the judges, and they must, or before God, and he will, determine whether the owner of the house has laid hands on the other person's property. In all cases of illegal possession of an ox, a donkey, a sheep, a garment, or any other lost property about which somebody says, "This is mine," both parties are to bring their cases before the judges or before God. The one whom the judges declare or whom God declares guilty must pay back double to the other. Now, the Hebrew of this, if this will load, sorry, is, right, I'll call the word pesha, I'll shor al chamar, aveda asher yamar, ki hu, right, ad ha-Elohim, and so this word judges, right, is actually something that, so let's look at the various translations. There's a lot of different translations. So NIV, judges. New Living Translation, God. English Standard Version, God. Berean Study Bible, judges. King James Bible, judges. New King James, judges. New American Standard, judges. NASB 1995, judges. 1977, judges. Amplified Bible, judges who act in God's name, which I actually like. Christian Standard Bible, judges. Holman Christian Standard Bible, judges. American Standard Version, God. Aramaic Bible in plain English, judges, capital judges. Septuagint translation, God. Contemporary English version, Judges. Um, Dewey Rheims Bible, gods, plural, gods. Um, Interesting. Um, JPS, God, right? So what's going on here? The explanation that um, so we as Jews, so this is actually something that is still done at rabbinic courts even today, right? If somebody needs to come and swear, they will come and swear, and the judges make their decisions, right? And we believe this is judges. Well, because of the arguments, Trinitarian arguments that people like Michael Heiser wants to make, Michael Heiser says that the word Elohim never applies to human beings. Really, really, I think it's a horrible argument. And in order to explain what is going on here, so let's say physically, what are you saying that the people did, right? How did they bring it before God if they didn't bring it before judges? And Michael Heiser's argument is that it could have been teraphim, it could have been an ancestor worship shrine, which Jews had, and this was... So I just want you to consider, if he would make that type of argument about anything else in any other context, would he be considered an expert to translate the Hebrew Bible, right? Or would he be thrown away like Bill Schlegel was? But he makes this argument. And if you believe this argument, what does that mean for the rest of your theology, right? But you don't get that when you look at the translations, right? You don't get the theological arguments that there are behind this, right? And when you actually deal with the words and you see, well, why are some of these people translating this as judges and some of them as God? Well, because there is this word Elohim here, but in context, and this is the one where it's the most obvious, but there are other contexts. It does come up several times. But Christians try very, very hard not to apply this to humans, because go back to the Son of Man debate that we had at the beginning. Luke says, this is the type of teaching I wish was commonplace. At one point in my life, I was so fed up with Christian hypocrisy that I became an atheist. If people taught things like this, I would have been on the right track for years. I'm glad you like it. I hope you find it edifying. Honestly, I think that Christianity could have a much stronger argument and position than it does, and that is why I have my channel. I am trying to help Christians refute what are the worst idea and most indefensible ideas within Christianity. Okay, so these are examples from the Bible. Now I'm going to talk about the actual texts themselves, as far as the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text. If you have any questions, please put it in to the chat, or any specific verses. This is actually taking less long than I thought it might. So, but I wanted to talk about the actual manuscripts. So the fact is, I don't think there's anybody who really makes a legitimate. Nobody serious makes a legitimate argument that the Masoretic text isn't the best text that we have. Um, I've never heard anybody serious make an argument like that. There are people who make Father Stephen DeYoung kind of makes an argument where he says that, you know, the the Masoretic text has been very specifically curated, and he criticizes it for that and says that we should look at multiple manuscripts. That is the Christian argument, that we should look at multiple manuscripts. Dominic says, was there a manuscript line all Jews used before the compilation of the Leningrad Codex? So the thing with the Masoretic tradition is basically there were lots of people all over the Jewish world who were trained scribes. And they were attempting as best they could to copy Torahs over and over again, the exact same way. And there were many things they did which, in order to keep it the same, I as far as I know, the Masoretes came up with the idea of what's called a checksum, which is how in computers you check two files to see that they are the same. Is you see that they have the exact same, they're of the exact same size, right? So two programs which both are the exact same size. So the Masoretes would first of all have things in columns, specific ways, and lined up, and they would count the number of words and things like this. There were differences between the various manuscripts. Some scholars were considered better. There were particular families, especially actually among the Karaites, who they rejected the Talmud and the rabbinic tradition. So because of that, they actually tended to be far more concerned with the text of the Bible itself. And in fact, a lot of the Masoretes were, in fact, people who were Karaites. But, and that became a whole question within Judaism. And it was commonplace, pretty commonplace, for rabbis who would travel from place to place, or to specifically travel from place to place, to compare manuscripts, to try to make sure things were correct. It was always an attempt to maintain it as best as people could, and there would not be corrections made unless somebody actually had another manuscript which showed something that people thought, oh, no, this makes more sense than that. But the miracle, absolute miracle of the Dead Sea Scrolls has been that it's pretty obvious that this process has maintained the text, certainly the consonantal text, in an absolutely miraculous manner. So one of the arguments, counter arguments, is that the perfect Bible didn't exist until the 10th century or 11th century. So the Leningrad Codex didn't exist until the 11th century, and I'm not even sure that the Leningrad Codex is 100% exactly like the text um, that Daniel Bomberg's people. So Daniel Bomberg was a Catholic printer who hired a staff of very prominent rabbis, and his text became the what's called the Rabbinic Bible, or the Mikrot Gedolot, and so he sent his people, including, I think, there was a guy, I think his name was Ben Adoniah, or something like that, who actually traveled a lot. And this was, I want to say, 16th century. Um, and he really traveled a lot trying to find all the various manuscripts to really try to get as close to a perfect Bible. Um, the problem with this whole discussion is the various manuscripts are so close to each other. It's like it doesn't even matter. It's not like we really have serious contentions as far as the Masoretic text goes, in points of doctrine. We really don't. And the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls really like put this argument to rest. Yeah, but for most people in the world, for a long time, all they had was the Septuagint. Yeah, no, and this argument was actually, it was a more reasonable argument before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, and you have to remember, people really misunderstand this. The Dead Sea Scrolls have only become a widely distributed in the past 20 years or so. When I was in college, this must have been 1996 or 1997, right around then. I remember talking to a professor at USC, where I went to school, who this was his life's work. And I remember I was talking to him, and I said to him, so I don't know exactly what happened. That I asked him, have you seen the, or he volunteered, he said, I've never actually seen the Dead Sea Scrolls myself, the actual scrolls. And I said, why? And he shrugged his shoulders. And I'm like, is it because you're Jewish? And he kind of shrugged his shoulders. He wasn't going to make that accusation, but I would like to introduce you guys to John Strugnell. And John Strugnell, who died in 2007, God rest his soul, so let's just read. Because became at 23 the youngest member of the team of scholars led by Roland de Vaux, I guess, formed in 1954 to edit the Dead Sea Scrolls in Jerusalem. He was studying Oriental languages at Jesus College, Oxford, when nominated him to join. Although Strugnell had no previous experience in paleography, he learned very quickly how to read the scrolls. He would be involved in the Dead Sea Scrolls project for more than 40 years. He took a double first in classics and Semitics at the University of Oxford, but never finished his dissertation and had only a master's degree. And he became the editor-in-chief, and basically things were under his purview. And In 1990, Strugnell gave an interview to Haaretz in which he said that Judaism was a horrible religion which should not exist. He also said that Judaism was a Christian heresy, and we deal with our heretics in different ways. You are a phenomenon that we haven't managed to convert, and we should have managed. There was immediate condemnation of his comments, including an editorial in the New York Times. As a result of the interview, Strugnell was forced to take early retirement on medical grounds at Harvard, and he was finally removed from his editorial post on the Scrolls Project, the Antiquities Authority, which cited his deteriorating health as reasons for his removal. Strugnell later said that he was suffering from stress-induced alcoholism and manic depression when he gave the interview. He insists that his remarks were taken out of context and that he meant horrible in the Miltonian sense of deplored in antiquity. In 2007 interview... Yeah, Jacob, I think he might have been biased. In a Biblical Archaeology Review, Frank Moore Cross said that despite Strugnell's comments, they were, which were based on a theological argument of the early church fathers that Christianity superseded Judaism, Strugnell had a very close relationship with a number of Jewish scholars, some of whom signed a letter of support for him, which was published in the Chicago Tribune. Strugnell had come increasingly under controversy for his slow progress in publishing the scrolls and his refusal to give scholars free access to the unpublished scrolls. Some argue that the removal of Strugnell from his editorial post ended the more than 3 decades blockade that he and other Harvard-educated scholars, such as Notre Dame's Eugene Ulrich, had maintained to keep other scholars from accessing the scrolls. The blockade on the publication of the scrolls affected by Strugnell and other members of Harvard's academic community was broken by the combined efforts of Herschel Shanks and Ben-Zion Wacholder of the Hebrew College, along with his student Martin Abegg. Strugnell insisted that he tried to publish the scrolls as quickly as he could, but that his team was the limiting factor. Shortly after Strugnell was dismissed from his post, he was institutionalized. Okay. And actually, Robert Eisenman was involved in a lot of litigation in Israel. It went all the way to the Israeli Supreme Court, I believe, to try to get more access to the Dead Sea Scrolls. My personal view is Strugnell was not allowing Jews to access to the Dead Sea Scrolls because he was afraid that there would be some sort of Jew magic. And in my opinion, this is just another miracle which allows people to see the credibility of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because obviously, this man was not positively disposed to the Masoretic tradition and the Jews and things like this. And so I think it is a miracle. I think we have incredibly good information that the Masoretic text is the best text, much better than the Septuagint. And before I forget, I have to say, the term Septuagint properly only applies to the 5 books of Moses, because only the 5 books of Moses were actually translated by the 72. Christians don't generally rely on the Septuagint for good reason. These were random translations by random people that was not necessarily really well considered. One of the things they said here is that even Hellenized Jews would preferred Ocula's translation of the Greek. Here. Even Greek-speaking Jews tended to prefer other Jewish versions in Greek, such as the translation by Ocula, which seems to be more concordant with contemporary Hebrew texts. I mean, even if you want to use the Septuagint, fine, use the Septuagint. I think you're still going to have to deal with a lot of Jewish arguments. But if you're being serious, if you really... nobody actually believes that the Septuagint is the primary source, right? That Moses wrote in Greek, although I did get people argue. This is the day of the internet, obviously, so you will get all kinds of arguments. But no, seriously. I think it's clear that the Masoretic text is available to us miraculously. And I think you should avail yourself of it. And I think that when you do, you will see that there are serious problems with Christian theology. And Christian Bible translations do lie to you. Okay, so that was my little presentation. I hope I didn't forget anything important. If anybody has questions, please feel free to ask. I am going to see Marie Alphonse Radisbon, who that is. Was a French Jew who converted to Christianity, became a Jesuit Catholic priest and missionary. He later converted of Zion, a religious okay. So he was born in Alsace, France, the 11th of 13 children, born to Auguste and Adelaide, members of the famed family of Jewish bankers. His mother died when he was 4. The family was assimilated into the secular society of France. I don't see him with having a strong Jewish background. So, not sure what you mean, Dominic. Yeah, no, I mean, there certainly have been Jews who have converted to Christianity. Some of them have been made into saints. There was this woman who became a Catholic nun and was shipped to, I believe, Auschwitz in her habit. And that became a so there have definitely been Jewish converts to Christianity, no question about that. generally, they have been people who come from secular Jewish backgrounds. Um, they're and frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I think better a relationship with God as a Christian than being a secular Jew. There are people who would disagree with me. I think, but when it comes down to actually what we see happening in Christianity, and I could give you dozens of examples, which is a very faithful Christian becomes ordained as a minister, learns more and more about Christianity, and through their strong faith in Christianity ends up converting to Orthodox Judaism. We see this a lot. Rabbi Skobach has a video called Flow on it. I could name you any number of people who have done that. Uh, it's actually a very large number of people. I mean, it's definitely people who are alive today who have followed that path are in the dozens. No question about it. Ahuva Gray is one person who comes to my mind. Gabriel Sanders, even William, the guy who runs the Tanakh Talk channel. Honestly, that whole community is a community of mostly religious Christians who have to come away from Christianity. Um, but I have not been able to find a single person who is a religious Jew is becomes very becomes very involved in Judaism, and through their involvement in Judaism says, "Oh, I should convert to Christianity." That I have not seen anybody who's actually an involved religious Jew convert to Christianity, and I actually have looked through dozens of names, right? The only person who really comes close to that is that Liechtenstein. I think it's Isaac Liechtenstein. Rabbi. Isaac Liechtenstein. Yeah. Um, and I read his book that advocates for um, converting to Christianity. He didn't actually get baptized himself, though, right? Dominic, that's fine if someone becomes Jewish or Noahide. It just makes me sad how they'll just mock Jesus the rest of their life after following him for most of their lives. So when you look at somebody like Shannon Neusner, for example, from Beinenu, um, she really feels broken and betrayed by Jesus. Um, and I understand that. There, especially in the Tanakh Talk channel, right? In that community, I think you find, unfortunately, a lot of people who are very bitter about their experience in Christianity. I have never heard a rabbi encourage that. Um, not Rabbi Skobach, not any of the rabbis on Tanakh Talk. I have heard rabbis criticizing that, um, and I think it's the pain there is understandable enough that I'm not necessarily going to argue with someone. Um, it's just, and look, fact is, within the Jewish community, there's a lot of people that they believe what Christians say about Jesus. They believe that Christians are followers of Jesus. Um, I think that's the tack that the Talmud takes. You um, they it there are sections where it is believing what Christians say about Jesus. I think that's a mistake. Um, I mean, did the rabbis of the Talmud have better information available to them? I Not that I know of. Um, they were told about Jesus mostly. I think there is a possibility that there's one story in the Talmud that's actually outside the Christian tradition, and that one's actually rather sympathetic to Jesus. Um, the other ones seem to just take Christians as at their word. I'm not incredibly judgmental of people who are bitter about their Christianity and hang that on Jesus, or who are very bitter at the their treatment from Christians and blame that on Jesus. I don't think that's irrational of someone. I don't think it's irrational to say, well, I don't think it's irrational to believe that Christians follow Jesus. I think it's wrong. Um, and that was what was surprising to me, was actually seeing how wrong that is. I don't think Christians under I think Christians betrayed Jesus. I really believe that, and it's sad. Um, so, yeah. Anything else anybody wants to bring up? Questions? Um, could you tell me that Shem Tov reference for Hebrew Matthew again? Right. So I believe the name of the Hebrew book is Evan Hashoham. Shem Tov's. Shem Tov's Matthew. You should be able to. So the Wikipedia webpage is Rabbinic translation of Matthew. Here, I'll put the link in the chat. Um, so it was originally in printed as an appendix to um, yeah, the book Touchstone. What was the Ibn Shaprut's book, uh, Evan Hashoham, I think it was. Eben Bohan, right? And so so it was printed as a appendix to that book. George Howard is the academic. He printed a book called Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. Yeah, a lot of people find it interesting. Um, I'm actually really interested in finding out if I can find a Hebrew copy of there was a, and unfortunately he named it Kol Kore, which is a really common name for things in and by a rabbi, I believe Tzvi Soloveitchik, who it was recently printed in English, so I can find an English translation in, and it's like $80. Um, but I can't find the original. Apparently, there's only two copies of the original. Um, do you know if it was missing the first two chapters like the Ebionites copy? No. So this one was purportedly a translation of the Hebrew. I mean, a translation into Hebrew so that people. So it was supposed to be available for rabbis to be able to read it to dispute with Christians. The the so he wasn't in any way saying that it was more original or anything like that. It's just that parts of it appear to possibly not be translations. And the argument some people make is that these parts are originally Hebrew, not translations from the Greek. Yeah, but this Kol Korah I'm really interested in seeing, because partially because it was written by Soloveitchik, a Rabbi Soloveitchik, which means he comes from a very prominent family. But I read somewhere that it had received an endorsement from Rabbi Shimshon Rafal Hirsch. And if that's true, um, so apparently this book Kol Korah is actually very makes apparently a similar argument to what I do, which is that Jesus Jesus was a good Jew, and that his the Christian understanding of Jesus is just wrong. And if a book like that was printed with an endorsement by Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, that's big news. Um, and frankly, I mean, I'm not sure if, as Christian evangelists, whether the evangelists want to print it. Apparently, there's only two Hebrew copies in the whole world. One of them is at the National Library in Jerusalem, and the other one is at the Alliance Israelite um, library in Paris. Uh, Neither one appeared to be available online. I tried to. I wrote an email to the person who printed the translation, but he did not respond to my email. So I have a lot of books at home to read, and I'm not reading any of them. Um, I should be spending more time on my reading. Um, uh, the one book I have been making progress on is The Loom of Language, which is actually really interesting, and has helped me understand like how languages are different much better. But I have like a stack of books on my bedstand, and I haven't finished any of them. No, I've never been the note taking type. That's just not me. Mm. You might try. I had a um, paperwhite like Kindle type thing book reader, and that lets you take notes and just like take copies and stuff. Because if I don't, and someone asks me where I'm getting my info from, I want to be able to cite it. um, you're a better man than I, Charlie Brown. Yeah, every once in a while, if there's something specific I want to cite, I will I will try to make note of it. It's just yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a good way of um, keeping track of stuff like that. It used to be that I was able to Google things up easily, but Google has stopped being usable. later. I'm gonna stick around for a few more minutes.